Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a good day, a good week. I'm pre-recording week 3, and we're going to talk about framing your question and your problem and trying to figure that out. We started this on week 2, and we'll continue today. So I just want to remind you, qualitative methods are meant to be social justice uh, through empowering other voices and knowledges. In this regard, it's about how do you make voices that aren't ordinarily heard to the public. And so that's what we're trying to do through the way that we collect the data. Qualitative theories are often founded on equity, diversity, and inclusion, and they look at the social constructs in our society. So it's important for you to think about all of these things. So for today, we're going to go through what is quantitative and qualitative when we're talking about questions, what are the variables in your question, how to conduct and write a lit review, what a scoping review, a Boolean search, and planning are for your project. So here are the questions, and I just want to give you a second to read all of them, and let me know if you think any of them are quantitative. So there are a couple questions where you might want to do a mixed methods where you could use some quantitative data to give you some percentages or to clarify where you should look. However, all of these are qualitative questions that we could look at the variables to. So in question 1, we're looking at what does racial ambivalence mean to residents in an urban neighborhood with high income? And so what that means is, when people say they're colorblind, what would that do in a neighborhood with high income? So you know, one of more prestigious neighborhoods in Toronto. And so how would we do this? Well, maybe from that research question, we'd want to talk to people in that neighborhood, but maybe they won't feel comfortable talking about it. So you might want to do a mixed methods. You do some kind of survey and ask them questions about their neighbors, the neighborhood, what they value, and then ask them if they want to be participants in an interview or a talking circle. However, because this question is very sensitive in nature, you might want to do it as interviews or kitchen table talks because they may feel uncomfortable saying things in a public forum. How does income inequality affect COVID-19 diagnosis in high density urban areas? Well, there's a two-way street you could look at with this one in mixed methods, or you could do it all quant. So we could look at the census data by CMA, the Census Metropolitan Area, which is your postal code data, and we can uh, lay on top of that um, your tax data so that we can see how much the pay is. But if we really want to know how that affected like people who were living in those high density areas, we would probably want to talk to them. But you could do this without actually talking to a person. You could just use quant data. So it's important for you to look at the way that you've positioned it. And is it a mixed methods? Is it quantitative? Is it qualitative? So in the third question, how does race impact rates of mental health diagnosis for children in foster care? This is very, very sensitive, right? You would want to make sure that you had supports in place for children or youth that are in the foster care system after they've talked to you, or for parents or foster parents who also may be participants. And that again, your question is so broad right now that it's hard to understand who your participant pool would be. So you have to make sure that your question is very succinct to who you want to talk to. And so I would take a little bit of time to think about, do you want to talk to mental health workers? Do you want to talk to children and youth who are in the foster care system? Do you want to talk to foster parents? Do you want to talk to social workers? You might want to just tweak the question so that it's more about how has, like, if you're really interested in the children and youth, I would put, how does your race affect your mental health diagnosis while you've been in foster care? That would be saying you're talking to the children. If you want to do it so that you're talking to the social workers, you might want to say, um, has race impacted the rate of has race impacted mental health diagnosis for children and youth who are in the foster care system? Do you see? It's just a slight tweak. It's just something that would make it so that your participant pool is a little different. Question 4. How do refugees in Canada experience seeking help for mental health concerns? Well, now this question is so broad that we would want to narrow this a little bit, right? So we want to understand how refugees who are here in Canada, so this is not new immigrants, these are people that are fleeing an experience somewhere else and are seeking refuge in Canada, and they're seeking help. So they often won't have, they will have a language barrier, and they might not have someone here that can help them to find the help that they're looking for. And mental health would probably be a concern because you're in a new country trying to flee from something that was already, very traumatic for you. So how does that happen, right? So when we're starting to talk about this, this is going to be, you'll need translators if you're talking to refugee people, or you might want to look at talking to mental health experts. So it's dependent on who you want as your participant. What are you trying to get out of this? Who are you trying to connect to? Question 5, what is the experience of identifying as LGBTQ2S plus in the foster care system, which I know from some of the research I've done is really problematic because foster parents hold a wide variety of beliefs. So, am I trying to talk to parents or am I trying to talk to youth? And so, this is something that you would have to play with as well and narrow it down or make more focus in your question. But if I'm talking to youth, I'd be asking, what is your experience, not the experience? Uh, if I'm if I keep the questions similar to this, instead of saying in the foster care system, I might say, what is your experience of youth identifying as LGBTQ2S plus in your foster home, right? And if I'm talking to social workers, I might have what are the experiences of youth identifying uh, in your caseload or something of that nature. So not so broad that I'm going across Canada. And number 6, what do people who live with migraines understand how it affects their current job? Um, so this could be done as a focus group. This might be done as a photo voice. This might be done in a number of different methods because it depends on what you're trying to get to here. So they live with migraines. We know that part. What we're trying to, from my understanding of the question, would be how do we understand how it affects their current job? So if you frequently get migraines, anybody that's had chronic pain in any way, migraines just being one example, it can affect your job because you may not be able to work every day, all day. So you might want to have more time, or you might need to take more sick days or partial days off to deal with your chronic illness. So do we want to talk to the people with this or do we want to talk to employers? So how you frame the question will also tell you. But I'm thinking we want to talk to people. So I would do some kind of arts based because it would probably give you more than them just saying, yeah, I have migraines and I can't go to work every day. So giving them an avenue to show you how that affects their day-to-day job and their life would probably give you more rich data than if we just had an interview. And number 7, how diet relates to social norms and to the symbolic forms of power. I think that should say how does. And diet relates to it because we've told everybody to follow Canada's food guide, or we've told everybody that you should eat whole foods. And why is that related to power? Because you have to have capital or money in order to eat whole foods. They're not cheap, right? And it's also about where you live. So when I go to remote First Nations in Canada, they don't have the same kind of grocery store we have here. There's an overabundance of processed foods and an underabundance of whole foods, regardless of season. So who would I want to talk? This is such a broad question that I would say you have to narrow it by either region, people, time, like time of year, because it's going to have a huge impact on your answers. And I think here I would do a photo voice slash um, something that may be a little bit more unique for dietitians. Maybe you've heard of this before, but doing the grocery basket checklist and asking people for their receipts from the last, 3 or 4 visits to the grocery store, whatever that happens to be, and then asking them if they supplement their meals with anything else and getting photos of that as well as the receipts. And then they can also show you what average meals look like in their house. And then you could also have them do the written component of a photo voice and not only talk about the photos, but talk about the things like in autoethnography, talk about the things that they typically like to eat, but also what is available to them. So when you think about your question, you should also be thinking about your theory. And I'm just showing you my conceptual framework from my dissertation, which feels like ages ago. It was I created this in 2011, 2012. Um, and remember I was saying to you, you can make your conceptual framework whatever picture you want, or it's supposed to be a visualization of your variables. And so this was my question. What would be the ideal First Nations healthcare organization, delivery, and policy for 4 First Nations in Canada? Because they were spread out across different provinces. Now, so when you look at this, there's a traditional way to look at a medicine wheel. We usually start in the east. And because our programs like Microsoft don't necessarily do the skew where it should be this should be showing to the eastern door, but like the quadrant should be that way. Anyway, I looked at the organization of care as one thing in each of the 4 communities. So who organized it? How did they get their health human resources? Who was funding it? The location of it, the culture and language available in the health center, and communication. So the other thing is you need to look at, for me, the variable was collaboration and partnerships. And I wanted to know if all levels of government were part of their healthcare system and what that looked like. Because in my experience from going to each of them, there was this mismatch. So in most of them, just the federal government was involved in their healthcare system, but in some of them, provinces were also involved because provinces are required to give out healthcare. So just understanding that and then understanding who the policy actors and advocates were and how that interplayed. And then I looked at the socio-political history. So what intra and intergenerational traumas by policy, so like the Indian Act, through social, the forced use of biomedical and the political and institutional policies and processes that existed pre the creation of the health transfer policy, which came in 1986. Then I also wanted to look at what level of self-determination that the communities felt they had and the level of self-governance that they did have. Even though self-determination is supposed to be a basic human right, that is not necessarily true in a lot of the First Nations in Canada. So again, that's why my ideal First Nations healthcare system is in the middle, and these were the variables I was looking at. I talked to people who represented families, I talked to community members, and then society, I talked to federal and provincial government bureaucrats. And so that's the variables. And that's how I came up with my question. And as I told you last week, the medicine wheel is also a theory that I have. There's like hundreds, if not thousands, of teachings around the medicine wheel. So if I was going to do just the bare minimum, the eastern door, which is where this is physical. It's new beginnings. It's spring. It is the color yellow in my community. Um, it is your like the physical aspect of things. In the South, that's what the red represents, would be the whole idea of spirituality or connection and interconnection. It is like childhood and youth. It is that growing part of you. And then in the West, which is black, but in my community it's blue, but I wasn't allowed to use that for my dissertation. Long story. But that would be the whole idea of you're in your adulthood. You have knowledge now that you're starting to try to figure out how to use. You're teaching those that are younger than you, but listening to the elders who are older than you. And so you're trying to figure out how you use all of that together. And in the white, just like my hair, are our elders, the wisdom. That's the north. It's the idea that you've been seasoned over time and you're starting to understand with your wisdom how to make changes to a system. So that is really what is here, and that's how I present it. So you have my research question, you have my variables, you got a little glimpse into my theory. This is what we're talking about when we talk about the lens that has to go on your project. So when you're writing your research questions, I want you to pick your topic and then really, 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 really think about those variables because how you position it might be too big. Remember, we were talking about shift workers last week and everybody's like, oh, yeah. And then we came up with how many different kinds of shift workers, or we were talking about um, diet, and there was lots of things about diet that we could talk about. So you got to make sure your variables are very succinct so it's not hard for you to be able to share them with somebody else, right? And that your question comes across very succinctly. And that's what your assignment one's supposed to do is you're supposed to be giving me that research question and positioning yourself against that research question. So think and write, what do you want to know about the topic? So what is it that you don't already know? Like, because for example, dietitians, you've had an entire degree and your practicums to learn about what people eat, what people don't like, what people like, why we're addicted to processed foods. You have all of those things. So none of that is new information unless you're going deep diving into something very, very, very specific. But if we're talking about school foods programs, what isn't already written about? We know that they're advantageous for a whole bunch of reasons, one of which is that children need vitamins and nutrition in order to learn. So you would have to understand why that topic that you are choosing is different than what we know will be in the literature. And ideally, you've read the literature, and that's how you come up with your topic. But if you haven't, you just need to do a quick Google search or a Google Scholars search, and you'll find out what's actually been written. And we'll get there. We'll talk about that. If I was thinking in Black health, I'd be thinking more specifically about how to, for example, Black youth access mental health services in the downtown area of Toronto. I don't care what's happening in Rexdale. I'm more interested because my organization's in downtown. I want to know that they're able to access that. But are my variables small enough? So that would be the question. And then I think about some of the things that have been written. Black health has a little bit more um, leeway because less has been written about Black health in Canada and specifically in the Toronto area. It's just really starting to take off. Maybe you're doing a comparison. You want to look at Toronto and Vancouver or Toronto and Saskatchewan. I don't know. But you've got to make it clear enough that I understand why you want to do that comparison as well. Because you wouldn't compare apples to oranges. You wouldn't want to know like Black youth mental health services in Toronto and Sudbury because they're nowhere the same, right? Like mental health services in Sudbury would be far less in nature, like the amount, than in Toronto. So you've got to think about why you would compare. Do you want to compare it for a language group, a group of Black people? Like, are you looking at 14, 15-year-olds versus 17 and 18-year-olds? Like, that would be a good comparison. Do you see how the comparisons would work? And that would give you a comparative study. Okay. So really think about your topic. Really think about those variables. What is it that you're trying to actually know about? Um, I'm looking at land-based learning, and I know Indigenous scholars and communities offer land-based learning, but I'm really interested in non-Indigenous people or scholars who provide land-based learning as part of their pedagogy. So that would be my piece. Draft yourself a single question. Try using how or what. But when you draft that single question, if it doesn't sound right, keep drafting them until you get to what you're trying to get at. Ask other people to read your questions or read them to other people. See if they understand what you're trying to research. Now, your question should be unique enough that a person that's not academic can read it, but it should be good enough that an academic reads it and understands what the variables are without having to question it. Okay. Number 4, is there a feasible way to answer your overall research question? So when I say that, you can't pick a question that you couldn't particularly ask somebody in any qualitative method. So you can't ask them, things like, how's your or no, you could ask that, but things that are sensitive in nature. You might want to be more specific about your question, or you might want to be broader so that they can tell you a story. So it's got to be feasible though. You can't make it so that they can't answer it. And how will you make it feasible? So um, what makes it something that can be answered by your participants? And think about your participants as you're going. So why do you think it's feasible? Like, what makes you feel like you could ask that question and that the methods you've learned in this class can help you to answer the question? And write that down. Like, even if it's just a sentence and it's only for you, at least then you'll have an understanding of what you think is feasible and not feasible. That's why I'm going to give you feedback before when you get back to the 3-pager. And so doing that will be helpful. And so in question 5, or part 5, identify 5 keywords related to your research question and aim of your research. So you could do a word cloud, you could do handwritten, you can look at an image, you can create a Word document or, all kinds of things. But these 5 keywords are meant for you to be able to guide your research. This is what you think you're going to be looking at. Maybe you think they're going to be the themes that come out of your research. Okay, so if you come up with your word clouds, those are kind of neat. I like them because you can put a whole bunch of words, but remember, these are also keywords that we're going to talk about when you're searching for the literature. Okay, so I'm going to show you my project that I just completed. I'm going to read it out to you, and I want you to think about the variables. The one variable that's very easy for all of you to figure out is incarcerated Indigenous women. So Kijibajik, which means turn it around in Anishinaabemowin, was us looking at the priorities and experiences of in, previously incarcerated Indigenous women who have children. So what was their experience and their priorities after coming out of the criminal justice system? We wanted to identify their mental, spiritual, physical, and relational implications of their incarceration for their motherhood. That was the basics. This was community-based, somewhat community-led, in the sense that Thunder Women's Healing Lodge, uh, Native Women's Resource Center of Toronto, and Aboriginal Legal Services all needed data on this because they all service these women, but it's unclear how we either prevent them from actually ending up in incarceration and or how we help them through their um like reintegration after they come out. So as you see, it says combining qualitative narrative and indigenous methodologies, we aim to examine the impact of incarceration on previously incarcerated Indigenous mothers, um, explore Indigenous concepts of motherhood and kinship, identify the unique needs of this population in the criminal justice system, and inform new and existing programs and services directed towards criminalized Indigenous mothers. So, what we were hoping to do and what we did find, which you're going to find out as we go through the course, because I will talk to you more about this project, But what we were really hoping to find was what led you to incarceration the first time. And we weren't just looking at federal incarceration, we were looking at remand, we were looking at provincial incarceration, we were looking at federal incarceration. And I want you to remember that in Ontario, we have a provincial site at Maplehurst, which is in Milton, and then we have two federal women's prisons, which is Grand Valley and Vanier. And so these sites are, and I did this for presentation to community, these sites are not accessible. So if somebody else is looking after your children while you're in prison, it's not accessible by transit to get to any of these sites without a car. So, or it's expensive and time consuming, and there's only certain visiting hours. So this impacts things, right? And so when we start to think about the research question, I'm trying to figure out like how is it while they're in, and does it help, like when they get released and they're reintegrating into society, how is that affecting their children, their teens or their family? Because they couldn't always get to go visit with the person that was incarcerated because of the location of the prisons. Sounds kind of like residential schools being way out in the middle of nowhere and not close to anybody, right? So it's just this idea that the variables here. So besides incarcerated Indigenous women, I want you guys to be thinking this as I'm going to go through it, okay? Are we ready? So some of the other is impact. So we're looking at impact, right? And if we're going to look at the question, we want previously incarcerated. We don't want incarcerated. We want previously incarcerated. And the reason we put mother figures is in Indigenous communities, people can be considered like an auntie, uh, a kokum, or a grandma, even though they're not blood related to the children. And so we wanted to know that. Or if you are a two-spirited person, maybe you didn't give birth to the child, but you are attached to the child. So all of these things were part of why we put it as women or mothers and mother figures. So that's another variable. We're looking specifically at mothers and mother figures because lots of people are incarcerated and don't have children. We're interested in people that have been released, obviously, and we want to know if they have a connection back to their children and or their families. So those are the variables. But the other piece to that is about what programs and services did you actually access upon your release? And so we were interested in that. The questions inside of our interview guide give you that. We also asked people if they had anything else they wanted to share. So we had some artwork shared with us, and we had some um, uh, music shared with us during this process. So, again, how you ask participants to share is totally up to you. And it's totally important to the way that you want to then analyze down the pipe when we get down to week 10. So, what I want you to do is keep writing down research questions and asking people and talking to your peers. I know you have an assignment where you're going to have a research question, but the more times you write it down, the easier it's going to be to see your variables and how you might actually be able to use some of the methods that we're going to talk about in getting the data that you'll need. So write it down. This starts your journey towards your proposal, and it's really important that you keep trying different questions or different variations on the same question. Maybe there's a topic that you're very interested in. Like I said, I'm interested in land-based learning, but not from an Indigenous perspective. I'm also interested in menopause and endometriosis, and I'm interested in how research is formulated upon non-Indigenous ways of knowing and being. All of that could be part of your question. It's how you frame your question, how you're going to get your data. So I want you to think about methodology like a big cookie recipe. That's why I gave you cookies to look at. You're probably going to go pause and grab something to eat. But as we go through each of the methods, those are the tools. They're the strategies, the techniques, the ways in which you're going to generate, collect, and gather your data. It is a sample of a bigger whole. So it'd be like a mixed box of cookies because you have no idea what you're getting, right? And you're sampling the cookies to see. You're going to take a bite out of every one of them and just get a little sense of them. And that's how you're going to do your analysis. And that's going to lead you to your interpretation. Okay. So when we design from our methods, and we're going to pretend like you have your research question already. When we design from the methods, we have to start thinking or design from our question, then we have to start thinking about which methods they are, right? So we're going to go through a whole bunch of methods today and coming weeks. I'm going to get you to try some on so you have a sense of what they're like. Others you might want to just read about or find YouTube videos about. There's tons of qualitative YouTube videos out there by a ton of scholars. I don't want to keep replicating the same stuff. If you have somebody that you want to follow or does research in the area that you're very interested in, I'd much rather you see their stuff, if that makes sense. So there's generic methods in the sense that um, they're not going to give you the rigor you need. They're not going to give you the data you need. They may not even require you to do much. And so when I say generic methods, I want you to think about if we mix all of the methodologies together and just do a little bit of everything, then that would be generic, right? And it probably won't have rigor because you'll have a hard time theming things or finding some patterns in them, if you will. And that's what a lot of qual data is just finding patterns and how do you deal with those patterns, right? So I just want you to think about that. So there is a number of different methods listed here. There's more, but I'm going to start with these ones. So we talked a little bit about ethnography last week. So there's institutional ethnography, which is you really your research is on an institution, an organization, a program, if you will. One of those where you're going to read all the documents, you're going to talk to people that are very, you know, integrated into that organization or that program or that system. Autoethnography is your story. Okay. So when we do autoethnographies, which are published quite a bit, Freud did it, by the way. So when he talks about child behavior and the Oedipus complex, he was talking about his own family and it was from his own point of view, right? So, awful example, but one that I could think of right off the top of my head. But that is one way you can do it. Critical ethnography means that you're getting other people to write their stories or provide you with things that, whether they're written or they're spoken, but it's you looking at their stories and you're being critical based on your question. You're trying to discertain what it is you want out of that. Phenomenology, so you're just looking at a phenomena. How does that work? What does it look like? Who's involved in that phenomena? What are the variables for that phenomena? Um, are there themes happening in that phenomena? Grounded theory, we talked a little bit last week about that. So it's really, you're doing this like, I don't have a theory. And now when I collect my data, I have multiple ways that I collect the data. So maybe it's you're using a combination of ethnography and arts based. And so to keep it so that it has rigor, you're going to want to make sure that you say like what kind of patterns you're looking for, right? In your methodology. So you're looking for people to choose to do artwork versus giving you poetry. Like, I don't know, but like it would be you making that choice and saying that's what you're trying to guide them towards, but they wouldn't have just one method to go to. So arts-based methods, there is such a large variety and it's getting bigger and bigger all the time. So you could do having people draw, which you guys are going to do in class. You could have them make videos, which you're also going to see in class. You could have them bead, sing, create poetry, write a story. You could have them on any kind of social media and just have all of their content as part of your, even if it's not similar, maybe you want to take their content for a week. Or maybe you do, it used to be really easy when it was Twitter. I don't think it's as easy with X, but you used to be able to pull the tweets based on a hashtag and or a phrase. So it was easy to pull data from social media. Social media would go in arts based. Films, TV shows, you could try to find films and TV shows that you think have a theme, or maybe you pick them and then you try to find themes in them. So that's what arts based is getting very, very creative. We want you to think about the bigger, broader things. We talked a little bit about PAR and CB PAR. There's also community led, I told you, and patient oriented. They're all in the vein that you're actually asking the community or the people that you want as participants to be part of your research. Case studies. So you might want to delve on multiple occasions to the same person. So you're doing an interview, but you do multiple interviews over multiple days, weeks, months, years, if you're lucky. So there are people that have done this. It is the longest process, so this wouldn't be something I would suggest doing in this course. But if you really wanted to know, for example, the dietary habits of children in a downtown neighborhood, you might want to interview the parents at multiple occasions to see what their diets look like without doing an intervention. If you do an intervention, then that's a whole other part of the case study, but that's beyond what we're going to talk about here. But case studies can be that, and you can then contrast and compare, like we were talking about different cities. You could do it with people. And then there are narrative methods, which is interviews, talking circles, focus groups, kitchen table talks. Those kinds of things are narrative methods. And you're just taking the transcript, and that's how you're going to do your analysis. Okay. So to start to examine your topic, I want you to think about like what are the keywords that would be in your topic. I said that a few slides ago, but I want you to start thinking about it a little more succinctly. So as you're coming up with your question, how could you go into the literature or online and do a search? What would be the words that you would use? For example, these are just examples and maybe you want to be more succinct than what I've got here. So health or healthcare, nursing, maybe there's an illness name like you want to talk about type 2 diabetes or type 1 diabetes. Maybe you want to talk about sickle cell. Maybe you want to talk about cardiovascular risk. Like you would put that in there. Nutrition, diet. And I'll tell you about the asterisks in a few slides from now, and you'll understand when I talk about Boolean searching. Food or food sovereignty, community development. Maybe those are the words you want to look at. And from that, I could probably tell you this person is interested in type 2 diabetes, diets, and the food that is available in a certain community based on what nurses believe. I don't know if it'd be dietitians, but at least nurses or healthcare providers. So that would be like, that's what I'm trying to look at. should be able to go back and figure out your question from your keywords. So are there other keywords that would fit for your research question? Yes, probably. And you'll have to determine it. So make sure you try to hit this target with all the keywords because it'll make it easier for you to find the literature that you really, really need to read. Okay. So a lit review, I've covered this over because this is supposed to be how you do a project. I want you to recognize the fact that this comes from a social media post. And I want you to understand that AI is good at helping you to find stuff, but I wouldn't use it for your writing. It might help you to improve your writing, but it shouldn't be the only way you write. And I'm watching students over and over again use it thinking that their writing's spectacular because ChatGPT or a co-pilot or somebody has helped you. But how is that helping you? You're not learning how to do it on your own. Eventually, you're going to have to write something for yourself by yourself. So I want to try to help you along and teach you. So when you're doing a lit review, some of the places you can go for your initial search, and I'm going to show you more, so please don't panic yet, is PubMed. Uh, so that's more for the sciencey kind of stuff or the healthcare kind of stuff. Google Scholar is really good, especially if you have one paper that you already love. You can go there. Same with Research Rabbit. Elicit is AI, and I haven't had really good luck with it trying to help me find literature. So I'm just telling you. If you use Google, you're going to get everything, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's an academic paper or even research. Knowledge maps. So Research Rabbit loves when you come in with a paper you love, and then it gives you a whole bunch of other papers, either it's cited by or it cites, so you can start to see the relationality between it and other papers, which then helps you to find other things in the same field, which is exactly what Connected Papers does as well. They look similar in the interface, is just whichever one you like. I haven't had much luck using lit maps. I have tried it a couple times. It's not one of my favorites. It's supposed to give you a literature map similar to these two, but I haven't found it work as well as Research Rabbit. We're not going to talk about the writing ones. So Zotero is a free online citation program, as is Mendeley. I personally use EndNote. I paid for my EndNote. I've been using EndNote since before it was EndNote, when it was ProCite back in the 90s. Yeah, I've been around a long time in academics. So my EndNote is got like 5,000 citations in it because I've kept all of my citations my entire time that I've been learning. These will help you because there's ways that you can use it in your writing so that your biblio is in APA style. So in other words, it's in alphabetical order in your in paper citations as well as in your reference list. Okay. Both Mendeley and Zotero will do that. I find a little more difficulty trying to use Zotero to keep anything because of the library setup, the way that they have it. Mendeley is a little bit easier and closer to EndNote, but it only gives you so many citations, like areas for citation. Okay. I'm going to talk to you about Boolean searching. I will post these slides, obviously, alongside of the video, so that you can go in and take a look at this. So this is a webinar on how to do a lit search that U of T has posted, and then you'll have how to do a Boolean search as well, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So mesh, which is usually formulated like this, but when you do a header in PowerPoint, it doesn't let you do that. Medical subject headings, and you'll be able to go to that website, and it just kind of downloads it and talks to you a little bit more about it. But mesh headings are really very high level biomedical terms that give you your keywords. So those are the ones you'd want to use in something like PubMed or Ovid. Um, they kind of help in JSTOR, but JSTOR is more humanities focused. It won't really help you if you're using ERIC because ERIC is very much education and social sciences, but it does help you with, PubMed or Ovid. So if you're going to be using those two particular databases at U of T Library, I would suggest understanding the mesh keywords that you would need to use, and then they'll help you to find the specific areas and journals that you want to look at. So in terms of Boolean searching, I don't know, maybe you didn't. When I was a kid, we used to have paper catalogs. We didn't actually have an electronic catalog, so I had to learn all of this after computers came in because it used to be you just went through the card catalog forever. Um, so a Boolean search is when you go into U of T Library, you can go to advanced search and it's going to give you all these ands or ors, and it's going to give you a whole bunch of different levels of searching beyond just like the title of a paper or the author's name. And so if you put them in, so for example, I'm assuming somebody would be interested in food security, but and you want it from Canada and you want it for school aged. So in the Boolean search, you're able to put all of that. Why has Canada got an asterisk, you ask? Asterisks, as it says here, are for variability to the word. So if I want Canada and only Canada, I would put the A. But if I put it like this, I might get Canadian, Canadian. So like it widens my search. You see? Canada's, Canadian, Canadians, Canadians. So whatever word you think might have more than one ending to it and still be beneficial for your research, you want to use the asterisks. So here we have stress and Canada or USA. So when we put the or, we want them to look at both. Okay. So it's important for you to do or when so in the States, they don't use the U. So you might want to put neighbor or neighbor so that you're getting North American literature. You might want to put omega-3 with an asterisk because some people might put omega-3s or they might put something else right behind it. And cardiovascular, and then we put an asterisk because it could be for cardiovascular disease. It could be like you could even shorten it to VASC and put the asterisk. So we're either looking at omega-3s and cardiovascular or diabetes. Now you might want to also put or type 1 or type 2 diabetic. So when you use the quotations, you see here the quotations like I did at neighbor and neighbor. This is for specific phrases, names, or words. So sometimes there's something that you really, really want to have. So stress. No, we don't want stress. Haha. But we put it in quotations because that's the word we're actually looking for. We want somebody to say stress, and if they don't say stress, it's probably only secondary to their title, right? So we want to use the word stress. That doesn't mean it's right, that will always get you what you want, but that's why we use the quotations. If you're looking for Karl Marx, you might want to put Marx in quotation because that's the word you're looking for. So I've already explained the and the or, and not is the other one that you can have. And that means that we don't, so if you don't want it to have this, so you might say stress and Canada or USA, not Mexico, not Italy, not England. If you want to be very specific and keep it to that, you could also probably go and Canada or USA or North America, not Mexico, if that makes sense, if you're trying to stay within what they consider the continental part of um, the continent. That didn't make sense, but yes. You use, yeah, I told you about the quotations, the asterisks. So you can use a question mark if you have variations on how you want to look at something. So do I want woman, woman, or women? So it's, that probably didn't sound like there was much of a variation in the word, but there's a variation in how it's spelled, right? So you put the question mark at the A or the N or the X so that you'll get all the papers that have that. So if there's that kind of variation, that's what the question mark is for, because we don't know which one we're looking for necessarily. Brackets separate things. So here it's menopause and women and then we have Ontario or British Columbia. You can do it that way, or you can do it the way that I showed you up here. Either way, it will give you what you're looking for. So to do a Boolean search, go to the main page of the library and hit advanced search, and you'll be able to use these kinds of terminology, which will give you much better results than just searching a word or a key term. So when you're writing a lit review, a scoping, or a systematic review, everything's the same. And this would include the grant proposal that you're going to do for your second one. You need an intro. I need to know why this is important. So what? Who cares? Then you're going to go looking at the research, that's the lit review portion, and you're going to tell me exactly how the existing research in journals or online talks about it. And then you're going to show how what you're doing is unique. It's a gap. It's a question that nobody else has raised yet. And then how you're going to do that. How are you going to fill that gap? This is what PhD students have to do. And then you would give a little bit more context with the lit review. And then methodology. Now, that's what your whole course is about, right? So it's the idea of why are we collecting this data? What data are we collecting? And in what format are we collecting it? Which is the methods. You need to say what kind of participants. You're going to hear this in the week that we talk about the research proposal, but all of those things go in here, ethics, all that. Then you're going to put in, if you were writing a paper, results is the data that you collected. So if you're doing a lit review, your data is your analysis of reading the different articles. Your discussion is the results plus anything that you want to bring in. So is there context that you want to bring in about a paper? And then so this is just basically that's the discussion. And then at the very end, you would have a conclusion that just brings all of this back together, and it should be short. Scoping reviews are quite different. And this is why I said to you guys, don't say that you're going to do a scoping review because that can take like a year or more to do because you start out with so many publications that it's just astronomical. For our title and abstract search of healing lodges, so it's a very specific area, we had 1,800 different articles that we had to look at the title and abstract to screen in or out. When we got to the end of the day, we actually said we had 44 that we actually had to like sit down and read the whole text. And of those 44, 27 are being extracted for a paper of the scoping review. So look at all of that work just to get to a paper. A lit review isn't as strenuous, but you don't get a Prisma chart at the end of the day showing you just basically those numbers. Okay, you see, I don't know if you can see the Prisma up there. This is in something called Covidence. This is how I do lit reviews and scoping reviews so that I can keep all the data because I can put all of the publications, the PDFs, right into Covidence so that I can always go back and look at them. And the full text, like the full citations in here as well, so that I can decide if I want to put it in my EndNote or into my papers. On this side, this is me looking at it from a different perspective. This is when we're setting up to do a scoping review. So you see the search strategy, extraction, where we went. So we went PsycInfo, Medline, Embase, NIHD, and Ovid to do this particular lit review. And so out of those 1,800, it was based on us putting the same terms in each of those databases at the bottom. And the search strategy is just like, what terms did we use? What day did we do the search? Who did the search? Uh, and then was it updated in Covidence? And how many hits we had so we could, like in Excel, keep a number to make sure we were close to what was on Covidence. Sometimes it varies by one or two just because you get duplicates that Covidence will like push out, but we wouldn't have here. So it would have a higher number over here. And then we would start doing the extraction. So as you can see, we have a tab for extraction. So those 27 studies, we would extract the themes or some key passages from the 27 papers that we were going to use for the actual paper that we're going to write. So there's additional resources. Again, you're going to have the PowerPoint slides, so you'll be able to touch this. Professor Mark Egan's top 10 academic writing tips was really good, and it's very short. I think it's like 4 minutes in total, maybe 5. But it gives you a good sense of about how to write and how to use Microsoft Word. Things maybe that you've never used in Microsoft Word, and it would be very good for you to do. This tip sheet here is also very good. It tells you about how to use topic areas and such, and headers in a way that is important. I know you're not PhDs and you're not writing a dissertation, but when you're writing the research proposal, it might be easier if you had these different kind of headers. It will help you to later on when you're trying to figure out, did you cover everything? For next week. So that would be um, January 28th, so not next week, probably if you're watching it before the 21st, I would like you to write out your introduction because we're going to use it in class on the 28th. We're going to talk a lot about positionality on the 28th. So what I need for you to do is to think about how you introduce yourself. Western ways of introducing yourself is like, hi, my name is Angela Mashford-Pringle. I'm an associate professor at the Dawlana School of Public Health. And I do research in Indigenous health issues. So it's very bland and you know nothing about me, right? Um, the way I introduce myself when I go into community or I'm working with First Nations or I'm meeting people who I want to have a relationship with in terms of my research, this is how I would say it. I'm an Algonquin professor who's a member of the Timiskaming First Nation in northern Quebec. I have 2 adult daughters, and I've been married for just over 30 years. I have 2 dogs, and I live in Mississauga. And I do research at the intersection of Indigenous health and education. And building upon my previous interests, I'm looking at First Nations pedagogies like land-based learning, culture, language, world climate crisis, just to name a few. I enjoy listening to a wide variety of music. I binge watch shows, TV, and movies. I like to knit, finger knitting, and like regular needle knitting. I love walking, and I love gardening. But I'm really enjoying right now doing diamond art. And then that's pretty much how I would introduce myself, and then I'd pass it to the other person or people to introduce themselves. I want you to also remember at the beginning I was talking about the trees, and last week I said get a tree friend. I'd love if you could figure out what type of tree you made a friend with and put it into your intro as well so that we all have something in common when we talk to each other. I hope this is helpful. I hope that you get a chance to go through your keywords and start developing your research question. Again, the assignment's due at the end of the month. It's only 3 pages. I want to keep reminding you because it shouldn't be that taxing because here's part of that assignment. It's your positionality that leads you to that research question. All right, I will see you on the 28th. Have a great week.